is a person whom I know for many years. We are friends and we are competitors. And Carole-Ann is with DecisionCamp, with previous forums from the very beginning. Actually, I believe she is the person who coined the very term DecisionCamp, and she was our initial chair. And today, Carole-Ann is the Chief Product Officer of Sparkling Logic, one of very popular decisioning platform. And we will hear very practical use case when they applied the Sparkling Logic for credit origination. Carole-Ann, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Jacob. And thank you, Sandy, for all the coordination. I appreciate it as well. And yes, you're right. I did coin the term because I think this is really cool term. So tonight, thank you everyone for attending, whoever is left in the room. I know it's getting to the tail end of the show. So I appreciate all of you staying up if you're in Europe like I am, or if you are trying to dodge some other meetings in the US. So with that, I'm gonna get started with our topic tonight. So what I wanted to do was to kind of wear different shoes or different hats, whichever and you want to look at it, but not present as being one of the co-founders of Sparkling Logic, but present as being a practitioner in the decision management industry. I've implemented a lot of projects, and that's the hat I want to wear tonight. I really want to share some of my happiness with the industry and some of my frustrations with the industry as well. So hopefully that's going to remain a friendly discussion, but I expect some of you may not be so happy when I share my frustrations. So hopefully no ill intent, of course, on what I have to say. But I'm really trying to contribute to this industry growing bigger, and that's the way you need to read all of my comments tonight. Just to give a little bit of background for those of you who don't know me, I don't want to get into my whole bio and what I did in my life. I've been in this space for way more than 20 years, which I should not be acknowledging my age, so I will not. And you know, I absolutely love that space. I love decision management. I will not be here if it was not the case. But one thing that I love as much as guiding the technology, and at least at Sparkling Logic and the previous companies I was at, is to participate in projects and to be directly involved. So back in the 90s, it was more telecom projects or government projects like missile guidance systems and things that sounded exciting when I was that young. But I've spent the big part of the last 20 years more in financial services, and that's why the use cases I will talk about are more about credit origination. I have a lot of experience in insurance, and a little bit less in healthcare, but those are the things that I'm really passionate about in the world of decision management. So with that background, all you need to know about me is that I'm excited about this industry. And the reason I'm excited about the credit industry is that it's all about making decisions. When you think about it, we think about a credit card or loan or mortgage or whatever credit product, it's all decision. It's purely decision. When you approve someone for one of those products, you have to keep in mind as a financial services company, is this applicant going to repay the loan? Are they going to pay their bill every month on the credit card? Should I increase the limits so that they will spend more and I will get more in terms of fees that will come to me from a different perspective? If people are not paying if they are not actually paying their fees, then how do I go about collecting on that money that is due to me, and what is going to be the most effective way of getting all of that money back? So there are tons and tons of decision in this credit industry, which is making it exciting for me, being passionate about decision technologies. The use cases are very abundant. There is plethora of different ways you can look at it. Looking at this credit card holder or borrower from a single lens, there are decisions across the entire relationship from before they engage with you, more on the acquisition side. How do I market to that person? How do I pre-screen those people, pre-qualify those people? How do I actually get to a firm offer? And that's more of what we're going to be focusing on as a specific use case. But there is a lot more. How do I continue servicing the accounts with accounts management? So that will be credit line increase, credit line decrease, all of those type of things. If things go south in the relationship, how do I collect on that money that was not repaid? So collections and recovery is unfortunately a topic that financial services companies have to deal with. And across the board, there is always a problem of fraud. As a borrower, someone may be trying to commit fraud, but more so, and especially in quite a few years, we've been hearing a lot about ID fraud and account takeover and how people can impersonate or steal your identity. So regardless of who is committing fraud, this is definitely something that we need to address across this entire life cycle around the person, around the client. And just to add more context as to the topic that I will eventually be delving into, is the different aspects of credit. For some of you, maybe credit means credit cards and this revolving line of credit. For some other companies, it's more about a mortgage. And when there is a significant purchase like a house, which has a significant price tag attached to it, there is a key decision that needs to be made. But it doesn't have to be that big of a purchase. It could be just financing an engagement ring or financing a medical procedure, or it might be financing something even smaller. So once you get those lines of credit with your favorite Home Depot, Lowe's construction place, or whether it's a specific store that you will finance purchase with, or whether it's not even a big institution like a store or a financial services company, but more of a peer-to-peer platform where you can borrow from other people. So all of those are different aspects of providing a line of credit in which the decisioning logic is going to be slightly different. All of those systems will look at all the different aspects of the client in a different way, and regardless of whether it's marketing and origination or account management and so on. That makes those use cases grow exponentially across all of those different flavors of credits, the different moments in the life cycle of the client. And you can add additional layers of geography, where in the US we do credit very differently than people do it in Europe or in Asia. So there are lots of use cases, and that's, exciting if you want to take it that way. So for that reason, credit risk management has been an avid user of those kind of technologies that we are all passionate about here in this show, in this tent for decision management. And on one end, because we want to help our customers, or those of you that are customers, to automate decisions for all of those good reasons that we're all familiar with, but we also want to help them or help us improve those decisions as well. So credit is just a perfect place to be able to rejoice with those kind of technologies, which makes me happy. Spoiler alert, even though I can talk about all the goodness and the beautiful aspects of using decision management technologies in credit industry, I just want to focus on one aspect, which is that this credit risk management needs more than just business rules. And I think that we are guilty, we as a group all together, and sorry if I'm making it controversial, but I think we're guilty of talking about decisions when we're really talking about business rules. I think decisions are a bigger concept. A decision is not just a collection of business rules, it's more than that, and that's what I want to address tonight, because I think a lot of our standards, a lot of our communication is not addressing it, and we keep using decision logic and business rules interchangeably, and we should not. So that's my soapbox. So bear with me tonight, because that's what I want to really address. So for the use case, I called it use cases in the introduction slide, because it's a compilation of some of my client projects. At Sparkling Logic, and I assume a lot of you guys have done tons of different credit projects, because it's such a sweet spot. At Sparkling Logic, we've done thousands of those projects. I have not personally done thousands, but I've done many projects that I was directly involved with. That's kind of my weakness. I'd love to be involved with actual projects, and I've implemented many projects firsthand. And this is why I think it's okay that you consider me as a practitioner tonight, rather than the Sparkling Logic person. So I'm going to focus on credit origination as a use case, not giving any specific details about any single client. I'm going to be mostly using use cases from the US, because they're closer to me, geographically speaking. And I'm going to try to address those higher problems that I see within the industry. And if you do have some more detailed questions, not talking about how such and such company is doing their credit origination, because I'm not at the liberty to disclose it, but I would be happy to talk in generic terms at the lower level of details, which I'm absolutely able to, as long as it's not specific. So let's talk about the process at very high level, very, very high level. I'm not going into the details of the process, but typically there will be a pre-bureau process and a post-bureau process, especially in the US, where we do have bureaus. So before you go and acquire this data from the different bureaus, you want to make sure that's worth it. So there will be some business rules that will say, well, if you're too young, then it doesn't matter. You probably don't have a credit report anyway. So there is no point into trying to pull any of your data. If there are some other red flags, if there is suspicion of fraud, I'm not going to invest in acquiring the data. But assuming that everything checks out, I will want to acquire the data so that I can make a more informed decision. Some countries have different, use also credit bureaus. They may be completely different than our traditional Tri-Bureau in the US between Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, and then you've got a number of other different data sources that you could plug into it. Other countries may use other bureaus, and some countries don't use bureaus, but they will have some other ways of acquiring some data, whether it's third party, whether it's internal, whether it's review of actual data. But there is a similar process, even if it doesn't map exactly to it. The big or a big task as part of the process is to estimate the risk. And this is where a lot of the secret sauce is, obviously. And then assigning a credit limit if it's a revolving type of product, or defining the terms. You know, there is always an equivalent to that. If everything goes well. If not, it might be a decline or it might be a manual review. So there is something going on at some point in time. I don't intend to go into the detail of that process, but I just want to pull from all of those different steps the diversity of business rules that we have to deal with. So some rules might be just validation rules saying, well, if your state doesn't exist, then that's probably a bad thing. Or, you know, if any piece of information is missing, if your date of birth looks suspicious or is wrong, or you're too young, if there is any reason for me to believe that you're not the right person because of any locale on your browser and where it's originating, you know, things like that may create suspicion of fraud. There may be some decline rules that will say you're not eligible because you live on a military base and maybe I don't provide services, or you live in a territory and I can only provide line of credit into the United States, the actual states. Maybe based on bureau data, your credit score is just too low, or there may be some other red flags. And you could create your own custom scores, or you could have one of those bureaus implement those custom scores for you. I will get back to those more specifically in the presentation. And then there are some rules that look less like rules. I think that validation and decline rules, those are things that we see everywhere in insurance and every other industry, and they are fairly traditional. And that's something that through standards, through different techniques of modeling decisions, we do a decent job, but as soon as we start talking about those calculations, I think this is where we're not as good in our ability to manage the modeling of those things, because we keep thinking about business rules as business rules and not necessarily in all of the different flavors that they can come in. Credit line assignments might be another thing. It's not so much calculations, not so much math, although there is quite a bit involved in there. But sometimes it's just the sheer volume of options to find what is the right credit line number for applicant Joe. Pricing rules are very similar to credit line assignments. It will just be figuring out what's the APR if it's a credit card, or the terms of the credit product that you're applying with. So depending on what kind of credit world we're talking about, there may be different ways of doing that. So there is a lot of diversity that makes decision management technology quite appealing. What makes it definitely appealing is that those business rules change often. You've heard that for 20, 30, 40 years. This is why we use rules engines to begin with, and whatever flavor they became through time, whether it's because of compliance requirements. We've all, I assume, experienced 2007, 2008 financial crisis. There was something similar in 2000. So the industry had to react with more requirements to make calculations, or create visibility, or add more requirements in many different ways, which need to translate to business rules. There is competitive pressure, economic situation, and not so good friend COVID has been throwing a wrench into all of these world of decisions. What used to be not necessarily simple, but what used to be more codified, I guess, in terms of decision management, has changed tremendously, because what used to be a simple employment check has become a nightmare, because unemployment has gone through the roof in a short period of time. So now we have to rethink where to get employment information, how frequently we need to refresh all of that. So a lot of the underlying foundation that we were relying on has been moving under our feet in the credit space, and that required systems to change, either by changing the rules, which is something we were used to, but even more so changing the data sources that we had to work with and consume them faster, and being able to experiment with them, because what is working today may not be working tomorrow, and vice versa. So we need to be more nimble at a faster pace than ever. And I think that's what the last 2 years have really taught us in the world of decision management, is whether you're relaxing the rules or whether you're being more rigid, depending on your industry and the specifics of your business. All of those decisions have had to change in the past 2 years, unfortunately. So that's what I call requirement zero, because that's not the topic of my presentation. That's the topic of every presentation before in credit management or credit risk management, was how agile you need to be with your decisions. And that's a given. We all agree with that. I would be surprised if anybody here tonight would say, "Oh no, we don't need to be agile." That's the basis. That's really the idea to begin with decision management. We want to allow business analysts or business users to change rules, to be able to change those thresholds and change the decision logic without any IT involvement, and be very agile. Okay, we all agree. Let's move on. So now that we've covered all of those basics, I want to drill into what is so typical about credit origination projects, and what is required that makes just business rules not enough. Why do we need more than just business rules, and what makes decisions more than just a collection of business rules? So let's enter the realm of beyond business rules. So I'm going to go over a few requirements. So the first one, which is not really new, because to be honest, it's been 15-ish, maybe 20 years of talking about incorporating predictive analytics and business rules. So if I said that's the new thing, you will be probably laughing at me right now. But what I want to expose tonight is that I think we've been doing it, we've been talking about it, we've been operationalize it in most cases for a long time, but not necessarily in the way that's always suitable to the practitioners. And, as I want to be the voice of the practitioners, this is where I think there is potentially a disconnect. So what we hear from the marketing voice is that predictive models are awesome. They uncover correlations in data. They can add precision to the decisions. They can complement expert knowledge, and all of that. All of that is true. I'm not saying it's not true, but this is really the 10,000 view of how to incorporate predictive models. The reality that those financial services companies are facing is more nuanced. It's not just about A plus B, business rules plus predictive models make a decision. It's way more nuanced in the way we need to deliver to them. So the reality, most of the time, is that data scientists build models, stating the obvious, though sometimes it's not really true. Sometimes business analysts or the risk analysts specifically will be those that are building those predictive models. What is true, though, is that most of the time they are in charge of operationalization. They are the ones that need to put it out there to be executed, to be or for those models to be computed. And the reason that they are liable is that the performance of the predictive model is not just how many people fall into this bucket or that bucket, but it's in the end, how well is my business doing? End to end. How many people am I declining? So many people end up into these buckets, but that doesn't tell me if I have a score of, let's say 580, am I going to be declined or am I going to be approved? The score may be very correctly representing the type of risk I am, which would be fairly high at 580, but it doesn't tell me if the company is going to accept this risk and then be more exposed, or is the company going to refuse that risk and then shrink its potential addressable market one way or the other? And all of that you will know only once you look at your whole decision, the end-to-end decision, not just the predictive model on one side, but how it's scoring all of those applicants, since we're talking about origination, and what final decision we're making because of that and because of other factors. So the need really is to integrate seamlessly the new models into the decision system, which is the way we've been phrasing it for 20 years, but really looking at what is the right level of transparency and what is really the way we want to integrate based on who is providing what to whom. If the data scientists have a nice key fob with a PMML model, that's one thing, but that's not the story for everybody. So it's not one size fits all. It's really the ability to figure out for some companies or for some projects or for some slice of a project, it may be okay to have a black box. For some of them, we need to have more visibility so that we can assess or we can compute the top reason codes. And so in some cases, when those risk analysts are on the line, they may want to see the complete calculation details. They want to see for each one of those models how much, how they are being computed, what is the contribution of everything? Is it correct that the longevity of the account is what has been impacting the score most, or was it the number of inquiries? All of that, they may want to have this level of transparency into it. So let me show you what I mean so that we can have a foundation that's more visible. So I'm showing you currently the a simplified version of a credit origination project. It's not meant to be the entire project. Once again, I have ethical responsibility to my clients to not expose their actual decision logic. So I will not do that. And I dummy down some of the logic to simplify it, although it's somewhat, at a simplified level, it's somewhat representative of a typical process. So what you want to do is first validate that you have all the data that you need, perform some fraud checks. Here there may or may not be a break. A lot of financial services will only acquire the data if all of those two steps are okay. Although a lot of the fraud checks will be based on some fraud reports from third party. So there may be an investment upfront. Some of them do it upfront, some of them do it at the end. It varies from implementation to implementation. But once you acquire all of that data into the system, you can augment it with your custom scores, or you can augment it with some other calculations of your own, and then perform your rejection rules. And if everything goes well and nobody's referred or declined, you can proceed to assessing the risk, which is what I call tiering here, and then assign a credit limit and issue the final approval. Those flows vary, obviously, from implementation to implementation. Some of them will still want to do those computations, even if it's a referral, and just make sure they go into the right queue for someone to take over the case. So all of that will be details of implementation. But what I want to focus on are the credit scores. So in this implementation for credit scores, I have 3 different ways in this project that I've done it. One that is very transparent, where we can see all of our bins for, this is a simple scorecard. So I can see each one of the bins and I can compute a score. If I want full transparency, I want to see exactly for each one of the applicants which buckets they fall into for each one of the bins. Another approach will be to import the PMML type of model and to just invoke it and use the PMML engine to execute that model. Another way might be to compute a regression score. Without going into the details, just want to highlight. So this one is not using a regression score. Let me find one that is. So this one has calculated a regression score. And for each one of the characteristics, I can see what was the characteristic or the attribute that was leveraged and the partial score associated with it. In this demo, I don't calculate adverse contribution, but if I did, I would use that to rank what was the more that was the affecting the score the most in a negative way, obviously, so that I could report on it back to regulations and compliance and all those kind of things. So there is not just a single way of getting your predictive models integrated, and it depends really on what those requirements are and how much visibility risk analysts need to have access to. All of that, all of those different variations, they really don't fit much into the standards. I mean, we're talking a lot about how do we implement a step, how do we, do we use a decision table or business rules or things like that. But getting at the high level as to where the model is specified, how it's specified, this is something that has been really, I want to say ignored. Maybe you have a more nicer term for it. But I don't think we're really dealing with that very well in the way we do standards. And that is something that will be worth integrating, because credit origination is one, but that's definitely not the only decision that is using predictive models. So I don't think that we should limit it to that. So peeling the onion and going, well, not peeling the onion because it's not more depth, but going to another aspects of requirements that are very common in credit originations, but not just in credit originations, is the use of what we call at Sparking Logic lookup models. You might have different names for it, but the idea is that some of your requirements some of those financial services companies' requirements may be implemented in a different way than business rules. Not everything is a business rules, not everything is a decision table. There are different ways of representing information. And, if you're looking at a spreadsheet with thousands or tens of thousands of rows, something really enormous, all of that doesn't need to be specified in your requirements. You may want to link to a spreadsheet and being able to refresh your spreadsheet every time this other group, whether it's actuaries, whether it's risk analysts, whether it's, whatever is the name of that group, that figures out what should be the right credit limit assignment or pricing assignment, or whatever the lookup is supposed to return. We want it to be maintained by that group without having to implement everything per se, line by line, and you want your engine to invoke it directly. So back to under the hood, the reality is that nobody wants to maintain hundreds of line items or thousands or tens of thousands and so on. So nobody wants to maintain all of those different things individually as business rules, because changing it will be saying, okay, rule 1255 needs to be updated. That's just error prone. But if you refer to a spreadsheet and say, well, that's the spreadsheet from 2020, and this is a spreadsheet for 2021, then that makes it really easy for those owners of the system to say, that was the old one, that is the new one. Starting on that date, I want to use the new one, so that they don't have to find the needle in the haystack. And typically all of those things go together. So they want to be treated as a whole, updated as a whole, not a fine-grained update to each line item. And it's not just credit origination. Obviously, it's very, very clear for those credit assignment tables that can be really big. Those tables are even bigger in insurance when we're talking about rate tables and things like that. So this is definitely a requirement where what they need is to have a seamless update, a fast execution of this thing that is pricing in some ways, whether it's a pricing table, a credit line assignment, a rate table. All of that needs to be very seamless for the users, with the ability to compare and anticipate what would be the business performance. I did a presentation on that very topic. Was it two or 3 years ago in Luxembourg at DecisionCAMP? So I'll go into more details as to what it means. But the big thing that I want to emphasize tonight is really how we are not necessarily addressing those. And I know we can have references to business resources and say, okay, well, this is the table, but that doesn't make it executable. That doesn't make it the full requirements if you're just referring to a spreadsheet and not specifying how to leverage the spreadsheet. So, back on my soapbox, because I feel like I need to show you something so that it's more real. I can show you an example. So currently in the system, I do have one lookup model, but I may want to update the data in it. So let me just import. I need to say it's based on my lookup model. I do have a spreadsheet here. So this spreadsheet, if I open it, it's just a spreadsheet with a bunch of numbers. And let's say you update it and it's, things are changing into your spreadsheet, whatever is the new credit limit. So I can save it and close it. So after all of those changes, obviously, credit risk analysts are more careful than just changing a few numbers here and there. But let's say I drag and drop it, and let's say this is my new credit limit assignment for 2021. I can simply create the data for it. And there it has been uploaded. So for my lookup model, I can say that I do have a brand new data set. So up to now, I was using this credit limit lookup. I'm going to add a new one, which is going to be the 2021. And I can add a guard to say it's based on the current date, so the effective date that's passed in, or the transaction date, whatever it needs to be. So let's say if today is greater or equal to, I'm gonna say we'll start on October 21st. So even though I'm putting it into the system today, will not be active until the 1st of October. And as soon as I click OK, I save it and I test it and push it into production, then it will be ready to be calculated. So definitely for doing that, I don't need to look at what are the changes, how many lines have changed, or anything like that. I just have to trust my source in order to implement it. So that is an important aspect of ways we want to change systems. Let me go a little bit faster because I don't want to keep you too long on or longer than you should. But another aspect that's very, very common in credit origination is to have many different flavors of your project, what I call many variations in here. But the idea is that you might have only a single decision, which might be, let's say, your firm offer of credit. You're going to say yes or no, and it's going to be definitive, and people are going to get their credit card or their loan or whatever credit product they're asking for. Yet, even though it's a single one, there may be different flavors of it. It might be because it depends on the product. It might depend on the channel. If you're VIP versus an employee, you may be treated differently, and there may be some red flags I care or don't care about. It might be because you go through distributors, or it might be different population segments. Oh, I guess the VIPs will be population segments. Channels might be if it's a direct mail that you receive and respond to. Most likely you've been pre-screened, so I don't need to be as rigid on the requirements and so on. But the big thing is that you don't want to have to replicate your decision for each one of those flavors and make the modification several times when it comes in. You just want to be able to do it once for all of the different flavors of your decision. So you need fast setup, fast update, the ability to visualize all of those variations independently. Here, just to make it more visual, I have a little bit of a segmentation where I might have a credit origination decision, could be pre-bureau, post-bureau, whatever. And maybe my decisioning is going to be similar, but with variations if it's a credit card product or if I'm financing a purchase. And if it's medical purchase, which will have a price tag, or if it's jewelry, which will have potentially a different price tag, I may want to look at different aspects. So maybe it's not the same attributes that will make me feel like it's safe to finance that purchase. So for all of that, what you want is to be able to maintain it once and be able to just manage the delta for each one of them instead of creating, in this example, 5 different copies of the same project. That is something that I actually worked on very recently for a US bank across 6 different types of channels / segments. And because of this ability to define once and just deal with the delta for each one of them, saying, if your employee, I care about this, if your direct mail, I will care about that. This whole project, in terms of rules implementation, we could do in 5 man days. In this case, it was 5 woman days because I was the one who did the work. But there is no way I would have been able to do it for 6 different flavors without having this ability. I mean, I could have with just copy and paste because that's easy enough. But then every time there was a change, I would have had to go, and there were changes that happened, I would have had to go across the board through all of those systems. So in terms of maintenance, this is where the saving is. Trying to to squeeze in one last requirement before we get to the Q&A. Champion Challenger is also something that we don't really focus on in our requirements, in our standards. Champion Challenger is a true requirement. It's a true implementation. So there's the decision logic, you know, that you've harvested and you've created the decision model, and that's awesome. But then there's decision logic that you don't know because it's based on behavior, and you don't know if people are acting this way today, are they going to act that way tomorrow? If they're all excited about, I don't know, a free Apple Watch yesterday, are they still going to be excited about that? Or do you need to give them something else as an incentive? Or is that the number of points that they're going to collect on the credit cards that they're going to be excited about? So all of that you don't know, that keeps changing, those are things that Champion Challenger can help you with. On the marketing side, that's very obvious, but also on those credit line assignments and the way you characterize the risk for your applicants. The picture, just to give you background for those of you that may not be familiar with, but the idea is to use the prediction of a single marshmallow versus 2 marshmallow with kids. If you promise them 2 marshmallow, if they don't eat the one you give them, it's supposed to predict that they will do better in school when they are of age to go to university. But is that really predictive? Does it change based on geographies? Does it change in those communities where kids are not so, don't have a sweet tooth the same way? So all of that is something that you need to keep testing to make sure that your assumptions or those things are predictive enough and still accurate. So what you want to do is really to have your business analyst and business work hand in hand to improve the business performance through those experiments and being able to follow live whether your assumptions are correct, whether you need to be more conservative, whether you need to be more aggressive. I mean, there is a whole theory around sensitivity analysis that works really hand in hand with, to reuse the terminology. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to show that to you so that we can have time for questions if there are questions. But in conclusion, credit origination is just one of many use cases across financial services or across the credit industry, but also across any industry, where what we need is more than a way to specify our business rules, a way to specify the way we make decisions as a multi-step process with dependencies and rules and tables, which is all awesome. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but we need more. We need ways to be able to integrate the bigger scope of decisions. We need to be able to integrate predictive models in there in a way that allows to specify what we need out of them. Not just a score, but what's the level of transparency in reason codes? What's the level of transparency in the calculations and so on? We need to be able to specify how to operationalize the spreadsheets, how to deal with this duplication of logic that you don't want. How do you deal with all those variations? How do you enable experimentation and specify it as part of your decision model? Where in your decision model can you say that your champion is 50% or 70% or 20%? All of that, it doesn't exist today. So we need more than just business rules in this decision management space for that very reason. And I think the artifacts that we have are not enough. Personally, I think we need to do more, and we really need to be thinking decisions. If we call ourselves decision management, we need to think decisions and not just business rules. So I created a hashtag. I've not used it yet, but I'm here to support the decision practitioners. And that's my soapbox for tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Carole-Ann. And this is another example of view from trenches when a presenter, and it's a vendor presenter, instead of pushing her product, she actually brings us new perspectives, what is happening in real world, and it certainly requires extension and probably serious improvements in standards and in all our products. And we do have good questions, especially from Ellen, and Carole-Ann, you can read it, and everybody can read it on Slack. And Ellen, maybe you want to add something.
So actually, because I'm sharing my screen, I'm not looking at
Okay,
this, like, if you don't mind reading it.
No, that's fine. I was just saying that I agree with what you're saying about lookup models. I think they're really important in many serious decision service applications, especially in healthcare. I've found where you might have databases with literally millions of records that need to be available to the decision service.
Absolutely. Think about just the number of drugs that we have. I mean, it's
absolutely,
it's enormous.
Huge catalogs of diagnosis codes and product codes and patient records and so on. But when I do requirements analysis for that sort of domain, I still use DMN notation perfectly happily, and I model these as business knowledge models. But when you implement it, they have to be a coupled database of some sort. Or you use a spreadsheet, but anything you call out to from the decision service, which of course breaks the DMN concept of decision service. So I'm actually wondering whether we ought to extend DMN with the concept of an external BKM, which is actually implemented in a database or something like that, which is not encapsulated in decision service.
I think it's, I mean, I don't have the solutions. I'm highlighting the problems, and I know how I've solved it for specific implementations, obviously. But I don't know what is the right way of extending DMN. I think the one thing that I see as missing today, besides that specification, or the reason I feel like something is missing, is that if we don't have a way to specify how to invoke that thing, whether it's a spreadsheet or a table in a database, we cannot test it. And I think testing is paramount. That's important. And that's the one thing I want to to bring to my soapbox.
Yeah. I think the key thing about a lot of these database resources is that they're huge. So you can't really consider importing them into the decision service. You need to be able to call out to it, and that breaks the semantics. So we need to think of a way around this technically.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do not advocate to get everything copied and pasted in the decision model. I think that would be a disaster. And not maintainable, obviously.
Indeed.
But probably one of a possible solution is to have multiple decision services, and if this, let's say, lookup model is so important and is different from another thing, because could be deployed as another service. It doesn't have too much logic. It's just using this, what you call the external BKM, and it could be invoked in the right place, and if you have good orchestration logic. That's one of possible solutions. Okay.
It is. I think the challenge still is to figure out how we externalize the data, but still specify the way to get to it.
Exactly. Well, in fact, most of the time, these data already exist, and it's a question of using them effectively.
Okay, we have time for one more question. And anybody? Okay, in this case, Carole-Ann, thank you for a great presentation as always. And if we don't have more questions, let's prepare